everyone, I'm Krista Seiden, Analytics Advocate at Google, and today I'm joined by Charles Farina, who's a Manager of Digital Analytics at Analytics Pros. Charles, thanks so much for joining us today. I know that your expertise is going to be invaluable to our users.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to go ahead and do a bunch of Q&A about all of your questions that you've submitted for the Analytics Academy. But before we go ahead and jump into questions, I just wanted to run through a few slides that'll let you know more information about our Analytics Academy courses. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the slides. So in our Analytics Academy courses, what's new? We've launched 2 new courses, Google Analytics for Beginners and Advanced Google Analytics. And with these courses, we now also launched the ability to have a profile and get a certification 24/7, 365. That means that at any point you can come in and take these courses and get certified with us. So no more windows for that certification. This was a huge ask from you guys over the last several years. So we're really happy to let you guys know that you can now get the certification at any point. We also have progress tracking in these courses, which is also really cool. So the first course, Google Analytics for Beginners. You can learn the basics of Google Analytics with this course. So what are we covering? We're covering creating an account, implementing tracking code, analyzing basic reports, and setting up goals and campaign tracking. If you're new to Google Analytics, this is going to be a really great place to start, learn the basics, and get ready to really start using analytics for your businesses. The second course that we launched is Advanced Google Analytics. Now this course will help you take your analytics skills to the next level. So in this course, we cover how Google Analytics collects and processes data, advanced configurations, advanced reporting and analysis, and advanced marketing tools. This is a really exciting course. Once you've got your basics, to go ahead, dive in, and really learn more, sharpen your skills, and become a really stellar digital analyst. So now that we've gone ahead and covered the courses that we have, I just wanted to go ahead and maybe start this off with a question for you, Charles, before we dive into the Q&A that everybody submitted. I'm really curious. I get to come up here all the time on these Hangouts or on these YouTube live streams and share what I think is new and exciting in analytics, the products and features that we're launching. But I wanted to take the opportunity and ask you, what are you excited about these days in digital analytics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm most excited about what's happening with the Google Cloud Platform, and especially the integrations we have with Google Analytics and within the Google Analytics suite. So for me, one of the most exciting advancements has been Google Optimize, which allows us to get really quick and easy tests, but also personalization components from the information we're tracking about our users on our website. So what we can do with the Google Cloud when we have access to all the data about our users and their experiences is we can start understanding profiles, we can start to understand audiences and traits, and now we actually have the ability to quickly test and actually try new ideas to see what experiences, what messages, and what actually performs best for specific users or groups. And for me, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I love Google Optimize. I think you know, I actually helped build the product over the last few years, and it's been one of the most exciting things for me to be a part of and work on. I think there's so much possibility with optimization and personalization, and getting a grounding in Google Analytics now is just going to help you be able to take those skills and apply them to all of these new things in the future as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, with that, let's go ahead and dive right into our Q&A. So first of all, thank you guys so much for submitting your questions. You guys submitted tons of really excellent questions before we even started, and we're going to go ahead and go through a lot of those. If you didn't have a chance to submit your questions ahead of time, though, don't worry. There is a live Q&A chat box in the YouTube Live screen on your computers to the right-hand side. And if you want to go ahead and ask a question that you don't feel has been asked yet or might not be answered, feel free to drop it in there and we will try our best to get to it. So with that, let's go ahead and start our Q&A. Okay, so our first question comes from Carly, and she wants to know, what are your best tips for using Google Analytics with YouTube? So maybe we can tag team this one a little bit. One of the things that I really like about YouTube Analytics, or getting more data about what is going on with the YouTube video, is something that we call player analytics. And this is really cool because you can actually create your own metrics using player analytics and getting a little creative with your coding. What you can do, one of my favorite examples, is creating something called maybe a perfect play. where you see that somebody starts a video and they make it all the way to the end of the video without pausing or stopping. And at the end of that video, you're gonna go ahead and send a hit to Google Analytics that you're gonna call a perfect play. And then you can also maybe code one that is a rapid pauser. And that is somebody who paused multiple times throughout the video, and go ahead and send that to Google Analytics as well. Then back in GA, you can use those events as segments. You can build them into segments, and you can apply them both and start to analyze your business data and see if people who are perfect plays actually act differently than people who are rapid pausers towards your business goals. So I think that's a really cool way to take advantage of that video data. Charles, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, another thing I hear asked all the time is, what about the YouTube interactions that happen actually on YouTube? And how can we connect that with what's happening on our website as well? So what's a really exciting addition is the Data Studio product that Google has now.
Totally.
So free and unlimited reports. So in Data Studio, one of the nice things is we have the ability to quickly use templates, and we also have different data sources. So just so happens that Google Analytics and YouTube are both available data sources in Data Studio. So if you actually go in here and look at the templates, we have Google Analytics, we also have YouTube, but you can come in here and grab this YouTube template, connect it to your YouTube account, and actually bring in all the on-site YouTube behavior into Data Studio. And within Data Studio, as Krista mentioned, if you're tracking all of those perfect plays, all those interactions on the site, you can actually bring all of that data into the same sheet and have both the on-site Google Analytics as well as the total aggregate, and have a holistic view of everything that's happening with YouTube, all within one report, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example to show. All right, so let's go ahead and move on.
So we had a question from Mark. So some analysts like to use more than one instance of Google Analytics to track two or more properties on the same web page. Usually that happens because there's different groups using it, or there's different ideas. So the question was, when you have multiple instances of Google Analytics, could this possibly produce unreliable data?
It could. I've actually been victim to that happening before. One of the companies that I worked for had multiple GA instances on the same page via a hard-coded snippet. And what ended up happening was they ended up fighting for the hit. And it caused lots of overcounting in our data. So what should have been one page view, one session, ended up being multiple. It was a real disaster. However, there's a lot of ways that you can help reduce the impact of this, or the likelihood that it'll happen. You want to make sure that your tags have the same settings. One great way to do this is to actually implement this through Google Tag Manager, and you can send the same Google Analytics data to two different properties via Google Tag Manager.
Yeah, Google Tag Manager is definitely the easiest way to make that happen.
Yep. Okay, our next question is from Anna. She says, I have a hotel client, and they have two website properties, one for the main hotel website and one for their booking engine, where users will do some of the transactions. What's the best way to track conversions, given that these two properties are hosted on different domains?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a challenge that I see often in a lot of different verticals, not just hotel. So when you have a website, whether it's e-commerce or travel, and your users experience your marketing on the first site, and then they go to a different domain name to actually go through and convert, it's important to note that by default, Google Analytics tracks users per the different domain name. So what you need to do is you actually need to implement cross-domain tracking for Google Analytics.
Yep.
So if you have the ability to add or customize the Google Analytics code on both of the domains, you can actually easily connect that together. So you definitely want to look up how to do cross-domain tracking for Google Analytics. And again, like Krista said, if you have Google Tag Manager on both, it actually makes it even that much easier.
Yep.
So we have another question. I have the same page in different countries. How can I actually see that page broken out by the user per country?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is a really typical use case for anybody whose business spans more than just one country. So we have a lot of global businesses, or not even businesses, but people who are interested around the world in your website. So a very easy way to do this, if you want to see your pages and your sessions, your content, is to go into any one of those reports and add a secondary dimension of country. And you'll be able to break down every row by the country that it's taking place in. Alternatively, you could actually go to the locations reports and pull up the country report and do the same thing by adding a secondary dimension there, but in the opposite direction of page or of whatever else that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have a few questions on e-commerce, and Charles, I know this is definitely one of your strong points, so I'm going to ask you these. For an e-commerce platform that has been signing into an account as optional in order to buy a product, how would you set up destination goals or the funnel buying process in enhanced e-commerce to account for both scenarios, so a logged in and a non-logged in scenario? Would you simply lay out the funnel for both scenarios for every product?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if we actually take a look at the Google Analytics demo account, they have enhanced e-commerce enabled. So the first thing I would definitely recommend if you're an e-commerce customer is to make sure you're using the new enhanced e-commerce that's in Google Analytics. And you'll see that we have these new funnels that are available. And this is a really good question because what's important to note about these funnels is these funnels really work off of one defined funnel. So when you have optional settings, how I recommend tracking that is track the required steps that are consistent across the different funnels. And then for the optional steps, it's a great place to use event tracking. So if you use events to track the optional steps, you can actually use either advanced segments using sequences to kind of build your own funnel, or using Data Studio or even Google Sheets, you can build your own funnel visualizations on top of each optional step. And that's a really good way to make sure that you can track each of those different funnel options.
Totally. And Charles, what you were showing, I think, is for the 360 version of Google Analytics. So if you have a 360 license, custom funnels is a really great option here. But you did mention a couple of other options, such as event tracking and segments, to be able to do very similar analysis, or with Data Studio if you don't have a 360 license, if you're just using the standard account. So one more question on e-commerce that I'm going to go ahead and throw your way. What is the best practice you suggest to track multi-device and multi-channel conversions in e-commerce?
That's a good question. So for multi-device, another really great feature in GA is it actually has the ability to do user identification. So by default, the way Google Analytics tracks users is it's per device per browser. It's essentially a cookie. So if your e-commerce site has the ability to have your users log in or authenticate, you can actually pass an ID for that user to GA. And if they're logging in on multiple devices, if you enable the user ID tracking, it'll actually stitch that together and give you those cross-device insights that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Another related question in there was about cross-channel, and that's a really good one as well. My favorite place to go is multi-channel funnels to do anything where I'm trying to understand cross-channel behavior. So in here, you have the top conversions path reports. So you can answer really granular or even really high-level questions. So for example, if you want to understand how social and organic are essentially overlapping, or do they work together to lead to conversions, you can just come into this report and you can type in social because it's using a linear model, so everything shares credit. And you can see how all of your channels are working together, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
So a question we have from Dave. How can I report on a click event on a page that does not take a user to a URL? So what's the best way to actually track in-page interactions?
Mm-hmm. So a great way to do this is through event tracking. And you can implement event tracking by following the lessons that we have in the Analytics Academy, specifically in the advanced course Unit 2, Lesson 5, actually talks all about setting up event tracking. So one of the questions that we had on this was not creating a new URL. So you wouldn't have a page view for it. But if it's a button on your page that you're looking for information on, then you can easily add click tracking to that with event tracking. There was another question too, similar to this, that asked about tracking mega menus on a website. And again, that's a great example to use event tracking for, because you can actually track all of the clicks on the different menu items that you have. Our next question is from Susie, and Susie wants to know, can you show us how to set up a simple custom report? If it's one of the classes already, let me know.
Perfect. We'd love to show you.
While Charles is pulling that up, sorry, I will mention it is actually a lesson in the course. It's in the advanced course, Unit 3, Lesson 4. But let's go ahead and have Charles show us.
So your custom reports in Google Analytics are in the customization section in the top left-hand side. And if you go to custom reports, we have the ability here, as you mentioned, to create reports very simply and easily. So we can actually relate this to the earlier question about how do we look at a page by country. So what we can do here is we just pick metrics. So I can pick page views, I can pick users, and then we can pick our dimensions. So for example, maybe I want to look at the landing page. So I want to look at the first page a user saw. And then we can see here, I actually have different types. So if I actually click a flat table, I can actually bring in country next to landing page and actually break out each landing page by country. And then I could use all of the same features we see in the standard Google Analytics reports to search, segment, or change date ranges to interact with this report.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a great way to relate that back to the question that we had earlier. Thanks.
How can I see links my readers click on my site? So the question here was, I have a WordPress and I want to know what people are clicking on. What's the best way to get that in Google Analytics?
Yeah, so great question. WordPress has a lot of really good plugins that will put Google Analytics on your site. There's also a few for Google Tag Manager. I know in my blog personally, it's a WordPress blog. I use Duracell Tommy's GTM plugin.
Me too.
And it's a great one, right?
Yeah.
And I go ahead and use that just to implement Google Tag Manager. But then I get more fancy with my analytics tracking using Google Tag Manager. So I set up event tracking in there and scroll tracking and other things that I want to know about the interactions on my website. So I guess my simple answer is use the plugins that are there. And then specifically, try to get into GTM. And if you don't know anything about Google Tag Manager, that's GTM, we actually have a course on it in the Analytics Academy. And so you can go ahead and take the Google Tag Manager Fundamentals course, learn about GTM, and then play with that on your WordPress site.
Perfect.
Cool. Another WordPress question from Tim. How do I get my WordPress categories into Google Analytics? I'd love to see traffic by WordPress category.
So that plugin that Krista mentioned, the Duracell, and some of the other plugins as well, what's really nice is they actually automatically get the categories into the data layer. So if you use Google Tag Manager, you'll quickly figure out what the data layer is. But inside of that plugin, it actually makes the categories a data layer variable. So essentially, in 3 minutes, you can actually have those categories in Google Analytics, and that will answer your question.
Perfect.
So is there a way to look at sessions per page? So Lisa wants to know, instead of by page views, can she actually look at sessions per page for a particular source?
Yeah, totally. There are lots of ways to do this. So the example was homepage or blog sessions through organic traffic. So again, this is where I would use secondary dimensions. And you can start off either in a, let's say, organic or source medium report and add page or look at unique page views, which is what I would substitute for sessions in these reports, or start in a page views report and add any other secondary dimension that you're looking at. And again, pay attention to the unique page views metric because that's what I would consider as a session in this case.
Exactly.
Sarah would like to know, she says, I would love more information about search queries. Again, our old stats plugin would tell us the terms people used when searching and landing on our site, give us a long list, but I know that now I have to use Search Console and I'm not quite sure how to do that. So how do you get search query data from the integration with the Search Console?
Yeah, so if we go back to our example, so in the actual Google Analytics, we have an ability to link Search Console to GA. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't been in Search Console before, go visit Search Console and go through the authentication process to make sure you can get in there. And then once you're in there, you can actually go into Google Analytics and you can set up Search Console by simply clicking on the data sharing button. And in just a few seconds, the data will actually share from Search Console and GA, and we'll actually be able to get the queries, the devices, and the countries from Google Search or Google Organic actually inside of Google Analytics. So it's a great way to actually look at some of the impression-based data coming from Google Search traffic, which is really, really valuable.
Yep, definitely go ahead and look at that integration if you have your Search Console set up. If you don't, I would recommend getting that set up for your site as well. Okay.
So a question from Linda. How do I find a specific page from my site in GA and actually see where that traffic came in from? So for example, she looks like she wants to know how can she identify her email campaigns and what they're looking at on the site.
Yep, so great question. And again, this is a case where I would use secondary dimensions in a report. Specifically, I would go to the pages report and I would find the page you're interested in. Click on that, so you're just looking at that one. And then I would add a secondary dimension of campaign or of source medium and narrow it down to the UTM tracking for your email. So make sure that you've set up UTM tracking or campaign tracking on the emails that you're sending. We have a lesson about that called Measuring Custom Campaigns in the beginning course, Unit 4, Lesson 1. So check out that lesson, learn how to use campaign tracking, tag your campaigns, and then use that to slice and dice your data in Google Analytics.
Perfect.
Dasan would like to know about recommendations for internal and external tools for dashboard from Google Analytics data via the API.
So dashboards. So for dashboards, the first recommendation is going to be Data Studio. This is really the next great thing for me that Google Analytics has done. So with Data Studio, I can quickly connect to not only Google data sources, but I can also bring in other data that I have through CSVs, through the BigQuery integration, through SQL connectors. So it really can be the holistic data source and reporting set across your entire organization. So within Data Studio, again, there's all of these great templates that you have access to, and there's just so much that you can do with it. If you really wanted to use the API or you needed to use that, there's great examples of the API. There's a Google Sheets plugin for doing automated reporting in Google Sheets. There's a variety of plugins for Excel that use the API. So pretty much anything you need to do around the API, someone's probably already written a program to do it. So I would just recommend searching for your use case with Google Analytics, and you'll probably find what you're looking for.
Totally. Both are great recommendations. I also love Data Studio. I think there's so much that you can do in there and make really beautiful visual dashboards that you can easily share around your organization. It uses the same sharing technology as Google Drive. So you just send somebody a link or an email and they have your dashboard. And I also really love the Sheets plugin that you mentioned through the API. This you can get really fancy in Google Sheets. If you are a Sheets user or an Excel user, you can put those skills to the test and build really fancy dashboards in there, and then just change out the analytics account or the metrics that you're looking at to populate that and also share it easily around your organization. So great recommendations.
So question from Lowell, how do you set up Google Analytics to track downloads of PDFs?
Great question. So when you're downloading a PDF, it's something separate, doesn't create a page view, and so it might be a little bit difficult to track. But what you can do is you can actually put event tracking on the download link. So that's typically how I do it. I would make sure that that button to download the PDF has event tracking on it, and then I would just know how many times that button was clicked on for people to start engaging with that download.
And again, if you use Google Tag Manager, if you just search Google Tag Manager PDF tracking, someone's already written a tag and for you to do it. And again, in a matter of minutes, you could actually have that up and running.
Totally. Robert would like to know if there is an efficient recommended method for archiving GA properties and then deleting them. They have 13,000 properties. Wow, that's a lot. And things change. Woof. I've been in similar circumstances, and that can definitely be a headache. What do you recommend?
So the first thing that is important to note is Google Analytics has a management API. So with the management API, it really allows enterprises and other users that have very complex needs, like Robert does, to actually make changes across all of their properties, accounts, and views in a matter of seconds instead of going in and clicking 1,300 buttons. So the management API is the first thing I'm going to look at using for doing large-scale changes, like as an example, deleting or adding filters. But for the question about kind of archiving GA, that's kind of a great use for the management API as well. Maybe what you could do is actually go in and rename each of your views and actually put -archive. And then that's a good way to see if anyone's using it and give people time to raise their hand if something important to them might be deleted. But that's what I would recommend for that.
Totally. I've done that. It works out really well. Generally, nobody will say, hey, I'm still using this. And then after a set amount of time, 30 days or something, you can say, okay, we're going to go ahead and delete this property because it's not being used. Great.
So Simon wants to know, why aren't content groupings retroactive?
So that's a great question. Content groupings actually happen at processing time, which means that once the data comes in, we're making those manipulations and transformations on that data. And so there's no backup file of that data, which is why they are not retroactive. We don't go back and reprocess the data that you've already collected. This is actually different than from channel groupings, which are query time, which means that at the time that you're using that channel grouping, we'll go ahead and basically segment your data down to what you've specified in the channel grouping. So content groupings, processing time, channel groupings, query time.
Add me to the feature request for query time content groupings.
Will do.
Perfect.
All right, Robert also wants to know if there's an efficient method for updating filters across a GA system that has hundreds of properties and multitudes of accounts. I think that's probably similar to your answer in terms of the management.
Exactly. The Google Analytics Management API will allow you to do that really easily. So, question from John. To track conversions, do I need to add code, or can I simply just set up a goal?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to track. So if you already have things like event tracking set up on actions that you would consider important, like a submit button or a checkout button, then you would just set up a goal on that event. If you don't have the event tracking set up, then you may need to set that up prior to setting up your goal.
Perfect.
Orlando would like to know, what are the best reports that AdWords account managers should be reviewing in analytics consistently? Great question.
So I'm going to go to the demo account for this. So for AdWords, what's really, I think, great about Google Analytics is they're both owned by Google. So AdWords has a fantastic integration with GA. So if you're an AdWords manager, what's important to note is all of your AdWords data is actually available in GA. And what Google's done with this is they've actually given you more data than you have just in AdWords. Because AdWords is going to be great at reporting on clicks, impressions, and conversions. Where Google Analytics is best at is reporting on everything that happens between that click and that conversion. And there's going to be all sorts of opportunities for you to come in and actually optimize based off of what's happening off a particular landing page. So as an example, one of the things I like to do is landing page optimization, or find opportunities for underperforming or overperforming landing pages. So as an example, we could come in and go into the behavior section in site content, and we can go to landing pages. And with just a few quick tips, you can actually quickly identify what pages on your site are performing worst or best, and then actually segment that by the traffic sources, for example, just AdWords. Mm-hmm. So I love to use this little hidden feature in the top right-hand corner called comparison. And what this does is it essentially gives you on-site benchmarks. So we can come in and we can actually use your bounce rate for your site as your own benchmark for each landing page. And I can quickly scan through this list and find underperforming or overperforming pages. So what we can do here, Krista's talked about secondary dimensions a few times now. I use these all the time. So I can come in and I can add either source medium or just medium. And what I can do is I can actually filter this for just my paid traffic. So maybe all I want to do is I want to find any medium that contains CPC. So now that I've done this, as an AdWords manager, I have visibility into each of my landing pages and to see, based off of the overall performance of all of them, which ones are performing worse or which ones are actually doing really well. And maybe I can take things on that page and then use Google Optimize to test new ideas and experiences. So this is one of the features I would use. And then you can go deeper with advanced segments and everything else into deeper pathing and analysis from there.
Yep, those are really great examples. Hopefully you guys can check some of those out. I think they're great for people who are even not AdWords account managers to really hone in on that data. A question from Rob. The URLs used in the Google Shopping feed are redirected, and in the process, the tracking parameters are removed. What's the best solution so that GA can report on this data correctly?
Yeah, this is a big pain point. So you'll see this when it happens to you when you come into Google Analytics to find your traffic, for example, the Google Shopping feed, and you come in and you see that the source of medium isn't what it's supposed to be. So in this example, what's happening to Rob is his shopping feed traffic is probably showing as organic, as he mentioned. So unfortunately, he mentioned that his URLs are being redirected. So the way Google Analytics and AdWords link is there's a query parameter, or if you're not using AdWords, you use the UTM parameters. And when the user gets to the website on that landing page, those parameters have to be present for it to attribute and pull in those traffic source information. So unfortunately for Rob, his parameters are being stripped because there's a redirect on the site. So the correct way to fix that would be to go to his developer and ask them for all of the redirects to make sure they save the query parameters and pass those through. Or Rob could also, if he could, go to the shopping feed and update his URLs. But he's going to have to do one of those two things for that traffic source to come in.
Exactly. So generally, safe redirects would be like a 301 would preserve the UTMs correctly. Yeah. Awesome.
So this is a fun question. Krista, what is your favorite digital analytics conference?
Okay, I'm ready for a fun one. I go to a lot of conferences, and I love a lot of conferences. So this is kind of tough, but I would say my top 3 right now are probably, I just attended Conversion Excel Live last month, and I thought that it was a really great conference covering not only analytics but also UX and optimization, and it was really exciting. It was a great crowd. I also really like Search Love. I think the content tends to be very high quality there. And I definitely have to mention eMetrics. I think it's a great conference overall for the digital analytics industry. We have one in San Francisco coming up next week. If you're local, you should definitely check it out.
Great. Yeah, I went to Conversion XL too. That's a great conference. I think my personal favorite, though, has always been Super Week.
Yes.
They have a European conference in Hungary. And what's exciting about that is you're basically trapped on a mountain with all of your favorite digital analytics peers, and there's nowhere to go. So
I was there this last year, and it was snowing. There literally was nowhere to go.
Yeah. So it's great because you get to meet, have conversations after, and ask all those important analytics questions to everyone, which is fun.
Yeah, but I love this question because I think that digital analytics conferences are something that are really unique and a really, really great way to meet other people in the industry, network, and really learn more about the field that so many people are very, very excited about. I know for me personally, I've probably made every professional move for the past almost decade based on connections that I've made through analytics conferences. So it's a really great thing to go ahead and start checking out, especially if you're newer to the industry.
So a question about what is the most important metrics to track for a business that doesn't actually have a lot of traffic?
Yeah, this is a great question, especially if you're a newer business. You might not be too certain about what to look at, what to focus on if your traffic is low. So some of the things you'll get out of the box when you set up Google Analytics are things like page views and session count and user count. You'll definitely want to go ahead and try to set up your campaign tracking for anything that you're sending traffic to your site from. So if you're doing email campaigns or social media or anything like that, ads, you'll definitely want to make sure that it has proper campaign tracking so you can understand where that traffic is coming from to your site and start to optimize for getting more traffic that's higher quality. But you'll also want to look at setting up goals. And once you get a little bit more advanced, I would also add event tracking to the list. So lots of things you can set up. For event tracking, you want to track things like form submits and newsletter subscribes, all things that are pretty important, especially as a new business. But right out of the box, you'll at least get some good metrics to give you a pulse on what's going on in your website.
Good advice.
Norm says, if I capture a visitor's GA CID during form capture, can I then import offline conversion data back into GA associated with that CID and record the attribution of my campaigns and channels to the imported conversions? So maybe remind everybody what a CID is first.
Yeah, so the CID is the Google Analytics client ID. It's the anonymous identifier that it stores in a cookie when someone first visits the website. Yep. And as long as that cookie exists, it'll track them as the same user. So it looks like what Norm is trying to do is to actually send some data that they have about their user from their offline data source back into Google Analytics, which is great. So actually, Google has a really great article about doing just this. So if you search Google Analytics predictive, type analytics again, There's actually a whole post on here. So it uses 360, but you actually don't have to necessarily have 360 to do the data import. But using this example, they do exactly that. They take data from offline, and this happens that the source is BigQuery, so that's why this is a 360 example. But then they tie it with the customer, and they put it back in Google Analytics. So here we can actually see that Google Analytics client ID. So for all the technical details, this is going to be a great place to go. But what's exciting about what Norm is asking is through this, there's actually a lot of actions you can take based off of what you're passing back to GA. So as an example, if you have offline data, you could bring that and actually send it to AdWords or send it to Optimize and then serve those users a different experience or bid for them differently in AdWords. So what you're going to look at doing to facilitate this is you're going to look at doing data import. So in the admin section of Google Analytics, you're going to have this data import option, and you can actually key off of user information. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at the data import and then reading the help and support articles, because there's a lot of material written about doing just this.
Yep, great recommendation.
So Dave says, I have 2 sites. He has a general informational site and a separate registration site. Should he have one Google Analytics property or view across both, or should he actually separate them into different Google Analytics accounts?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think you kind of covered it a little bit earlier. You mentioned cross-domain tracking, but in this case, I think it's a little bit different because Dave wants to know, should that data be in the same account or same property, or should it be separate? And I think the answer is really going to depend on your analysis needs. So if you want to be able to see that data together, especially if it's something like an informational site and a registration site, you want to see how people flow between the two, it's probably a good idea to have that data in the same property, in the same view, and then you can set up cross-domain tracking if they're on different URLs. But if you don't actually need that data connected and you don't want to see it together, there might be a reason why you would want to have it in separate properties. But in general, I would say probably the same property if you can get away with it. Krista has a similar question. She says, I have a property related with the domain test1.com, and I want to create a view of only those users and sessions related to a.test1.com. How can I create it?
Yeah, this is a really common question I get. And another example might be maybe you have blog.yourwebsite.com, and then you have the rest of your site on yourwebsite.com. So what can we do in Google Analytics to actually facilitate the different views we might be looking for? So kind of the older maybe recommendation with Google Analytics was that every subdomain needed its own view. But I actually might differentiate or actually recommend against that for a couple of reasons. One is, really for me, the most powerful feature of Google Analytics is the ability to use audiences or advanced segments. So if you're familiar with advanced segments, you could easily come in here and you could create a segment and say, I only want to look at anyone that was on a particular host name. So for example, if I only wanted to find people on my website in here, I could just pick this host name. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell me everything about that user. And I'm not actually limited to just seeing what they did on, for example, my website. But if they actually clicked a link from my website back to the other or the other subdomain, it would show me that as well. So by using these audiences, you can actually track how many people were on that site and also where else they went to. When you just create a view, which you could do as well, so if we went into the admin, you can come in, you could create a new view here. And then what you would do is you would apply a filter to it. So using a filter, you might say, I only want this particular view to only have traffic to the host name that contained blog.yourwebsite.com. But what's important to note is when you do this, things like the bounce rate might not actually be what you think they are. Because if they actually click a link from your blog to your main website, since this view is only showing you just the blog, it's actually going to show as a bounce in this view because you filtered out the rest of the website. So that's why for questions like this, I actually prefer doing them with audiences instead of filters. But if you wanted a filtered view, this is exactly how you do it right here.
Great. Thanks.
So Taylor says that his clicks from his social media are not appearing in the social category or the social channel. Where can he find this in Google Analytics?
So that's a great question. There are social reports in Google Analytics. honestly, I find them to be a little bit misleading because they don't actually collect all of the social network information, because oftentimes people are using, let's say, the Facebook app. And when they open one of your pages via the Facebook app from an ad there, it's actually going to open within Facebook, and it's not going to send that data back to Google Analytics letting you know that Facebook sent you that user. It'll show up as direct or none. So what we actually recommend is to make sure that you are using UTM tracking on all of your social media posts. And this will ensure that you can find the source and medium, the social plus whatever you're defining that campaign as, and even the content field to make a note of the title of the article or the ad that you are actually sending users from. And this will give you a much clearer view of the social traffic coming to your website. Katie says, I'd like to understand which of our blogs are helping with SEO versus which are not, so we can archive them. Should we create a custom segment, or how should we analyze this?
So that's another great case for secondary dimensions, or even the audiences that I just talked about. So I'd recommend applying a secondary dimension of organic, or you could create an audience of organic versus non-organic, and then compare the performance on the page. And hopefully what you're going to do is try and tie that to an outcome. So what are you trying to get those particular users to do from the blog? And then you'll use that to understand which pages maybe you want to archive and take away, or which ones you don't.
Yeah, great. Marissa says, in the past, my colleagues were tagging UTM on internal links to track call to action buttons and download from blog articles. Please don't do this. Bad practice. How would this affect data aggregated in custom funnel reports? She also said she knows that UTM tagging on internal links is not the right approach. So can we delete all of that past data? What do we do here?
Yeah, never put UTM parameters on your own website. They only go on traffic sources that you're driving to your site. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there's no way to really fix it. What you obviously have to do is go in and remove all the UTM parameters from your site as quickly as possible. But the data is pretty much permanent for what you have. So you really need to focus on cleaning it and then using that clean data forward, unfortunately.
Yep. Great. So Saro asks, or she says, I'm wondering if in general you have a class or affinity or user group in GA for non-sales websites. I know a lot of our examples are typically from the Google Merchandise Store, which is an e-commerce website. But she's interested in nonprofits, education, or any other resources behavior for websites. So yes, we definitely have categorization for these. Maybe Charles can go ahead and show us in the demo. Under properties, you can actually select your industry category, and this will give you information for benchmarking, I believe.
Yeah, so in our audience, benchmarking, and then see if these are enabled here. So in our channels, so here you have benchmarks for channels, locations, and devices. And within here, what you can do, as Krista mentioned, is you can actually select a particular vertical. So automatically, Google's going to assign one for you. But if it's not the one you're looking for, or you want to get more granular or less granular, you can actually come in and pick something. So for example, shoes, I could pick footwear or athletic or just casual shoes. And then you get to pick who you want to actually be in the benchmark group with. So it's trying to do it by equal size websites, but you could actually change that if you wanted to. And then you can select a particular country that you're looking for, and then see your particular benchmarks right in there.
Great. So Vapov wants to know if we can explain more about the lifetime value report, the LTV reports, which were recently added to Google Analytics.
Yeah, the lifetime value reports are, I think, a really valuable addition to GA. So you can find those in your audience section. They're right underneath the active users. And here what we're doing is we're actually tracking the revenue per user by default over a particular date range. So if you have, for example, a mobile app with in-app purchases, or if you're an e-commerce site and you're trying to get those users to purchase related products or upsell them later, this is a great report to come in and actually see how your particular campaigns are actually performing and driving that LTV over time.
Great.
So there's a question about what happened with the course regarding mobile app analytics.
That's a great question. So we used to have a course on Analytics Academy taught by Fontaine Foxworth about mobile analytics. But over the years, our mobile analytics offerings have changed quite a bit, and this course has unfortunately become quite outdated. So we decided to take that down, and we actually have a new mobile app analytics product called Firebase Analytics here at Google. Really exciting product. I actually work on it as a product manager. And we actually have a Udacity course on Firebase Analytics that you can go ahead and take to learn all about that as well, and that's available at Udacity. So Jan would like to know, he said, we would like to add an extra step in our e-commerce funnel for some products. This causes our funnel to not exactly be the same for each product. How would you manage the measurement of the funnel?
So I think that's related to the question at the beginning. So I definitely recommend for your e-commerce reports. So remember, with enhanced e-commerce, with Google Analytics, both the standard and the 360 version, we have the shopping behavior and the checkout behavior funnels. So these should be the funnels that are most consistent across everything. You want them to be the same steps. And then for any optional or product-specific steps, the best way to facilitate tracking on that is going to be with event tracking. Mm-hmm. And then you could use Data Studio or you could use Google Sheets to build visualizations of your custom funnels that are applicable to your use case.
Since you bring Data Studio, Brian has a question. He says, can you use Data Studio to link other sources to relay all data in one place?
So maybe I'll just do a demo of Data Studio because I love it so much. So with Data Studio, again, it's amazing because in a matter of minutes, you can actually create and share and collaborate with data across multiple data sources, as you mentioned. So as an example, I can come in here and say, I want to use the Google Analytics for my main website, and then I can actually drag these directly on the canvas. So I'll draw a scorecard, we'll draw a pie chart, I can draw a date range to make these interactive. But the question was, can I grab data from multiple data sources? So if I draw 2 scorecards, you'll see on the right-hand side in Data Studio, you can actually change the data source. So if I open my data source, I can go and grab anything else in Google Analytics. Or if I click Create New Data Source, you can actually, in the same sheet, grab data from all of the other connectors that are available in here. And Google Sheets is probably my favorite because with Sheets, you have the ability to easily grab data from all sorts of places. Anything you can put into Excel, you should be putting in Sheets. But some of the partners have actually built connectors from Sheets to Facebook. So if you wanted to bring all of your Facebook impressions, clicks, shares, followers, likes, there's actually live data and connectors to use from that. But to finish this example, I can simply select a second data source, add it, and now I have 2 different Google Analytics sources on the same sheet. And if I wanted to view this as someone else would, I can come in, I can interact with it by changing the date range, and both of those data sources are updated by the control, which is awesome.
Perfect. That was a great little demo of that. And as you mentioned, you can actually connect to lots of different data sources. BigQuery if you're a premium customer, 360 customer. SQL, Google Sheets, as Charles mentioned, is the most flexible here. Any data that you want to put in Sheets, you can then bring in to Google Data Studio.
So a question was, how do I remove frequent users? So for this, it looks like they're trying to remove internal traffic from Google Analytics to ensure that they're not overcounting or affecting some of the core metrics for that business.
Yep, this is a great question. A lot of companies will have potentially a lot of users using their internal sources that might be driving up their traffic in their Google Analytics accounts. So what we recommend for this is that you actually exclude your internal IP traffic. So what you would do is you actually set up a filter. Charles is demoing it right now. To go ahead, a predefined filter to exclude traffic from an IP address, and you'll just need to know your static IP to be able to do this.
Easy.
If you have multiple IPs, you can use regex and get really fancy and putting them all in there to exclude lots of different traffic sources. Sarah would like to know, she says, I feel like we have both direct and none as separate sources in our report. What's the difference?
Oh, fun question. So if we were to actually go look at the traffic sources section, so I'll go to acquisition, all traffic, and we'll go to source medium, which is kind of the default traffic source report for me. And in here, the question was, we can see on row 2, there's direct and none. So sometimes you see those separate, and you would. So if you're looking at the source tab, you just see direct, and if you're looking at the medium tab, you'd see none. So they're the same thing. It's essentially untagged traffic. I think someone in the chat described it that way. It should be anyone that's bookmarked your website or typed your URL in directly. But what most people don't realize is actually if you're not tagging all of your traffic with UTM parameters, sometimes direct traffic could actually be taking credit from other sources. So for example, if you're sending out emails to your users and you're not adding those UTM parameters to those emails, that'll actually show up as direct traffic in GA. But to answer that question, direct and none are essentially the same thing.
Great, thanks. Shanique would like to know more about session unification. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so session unification is a feature that is related to the user ID tracking. So we've talked about that a few times. So again, if you have the ability to track your logged in or authenticated users, you can go into GA, and in the tracking info section, you'll find the user ID settings. And here's where you'll agree to the policy, you'll set it up, and there's instructions for both Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics of how to pass that user ID, and then here's that session unification setting. So what session unification does is when you pass in the identifier for that user, you have the option of passing that identifier back to the beginning of the session or not. So typically we would recommend leaving it on. And that means, for example, if someone came from an email and then on the 4th page they logged in, if I have session unification on, it's going to actually pass that ID for the previous 4 pages as well. Or if I turn it off, then I'll only have page 4 and forward instead of the first 4.
Great. All right. I think we have a couple of maybe just more general wrap-up questions.
Sure.
I think we've made it through almost all of you guys' questions, which is pretty impressive in this time. So, Charles, I'm going to ask you, where do you see web analytics 10 years from now?
So much. So for me, I just see a lot more, I think, on actually using the data. So I was fortunate enough to attend Google Cloud Next and see some of the things that they've been working on and how that's going to relate to our field in digital analytics. So one of my favorite things I saw demoed, and it's actually available now, was in the Google Cloud, they actually have a video intelligence API. So think about all of the videos and photos that you have on your phone. It's really hard to actually remember a memory. Like I was at a baseball game and then go in and find the baseball photos. So with this video intelligence API, you can actually put in all of your media against it, and it'll actually go into a video frame by frame and then pull out which frames were related to video, and then you can actually go in and play them back. So for me, I see the application of that. So for example, if I have a site where users can upload photos, instead of having someone manually set what the keywords or what the context of that photo is, you can actually have it all done through machine learning and different APIs. And for me, I just see a lot more use around, I think, personalization, where instead of having kind of one aggregate experience where everyone's seeing, I think the web is going to start to be much more personalized. It's going to be much more experiential, and it's all going to be based off of the data that we're collecting off of them.
Yep.
What about you? Where do you see it?
Oof. I mean, I agree. I think personalization is definitely something that we are moving towards. I think we're starting to move towards it now in small ways. Some of the things that we were doing with Optimize and making sure that we can carry experiences from one site to another or from an ad to your website just gets into the tip of the iceberg of personalization. Sure. So I think that's really, really exciting. I'm also excited about kind of the Internet of Things, the IoT field, connected home. I know me personally, I track all of my health metrics. I wear a Jawbone and get all of my data, and I think that there are a lot of applications for that, health sciences and really driving database decisions there as well. So I think it's a super exciting field that is only going to get more exciting as we go along.
So as someone who is getting into the field of digital analytics, where should they go after they get their first certification for Google Analytics or even for Google AdWords? What do they do next?
Great question. And I think this is a really nice one to wrap up on. So there's a ton of options for you after you've gone ahead and taken the Google Analytics for Beginners course. Go ahead and take the advanced course. There are more courses. We mentioned earlier the Tag Manager Fundamentals course. That's a great one to get even more advanced with your analytics skill set. Outside of Analytics Academy, there's a ton of resources. I know for me personally, I've followed and learned from a ton of blogs and Twitter accounts and various people in the industry over the last many, many years. So a lot of great resources out there of people who have just been doing digital analytics for a long time and really know what they're talking about. On top of that, the demo account that we've showed throughout this and mentioned many times and you use in the Analytics Academy courses is a really great resource to actually try out some of these things that you're learning. So this is a fully working analytics account on the Google Merchandise Store, and you can try out any of the principles that you've learned in the courses to really understand in practice how you would use these things. And further from that, I don't know if you've heard of the Analysis Exchange.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a really great project where basically they partner a nonprofit with a mentee, somebody who's getting into the digital analytics field and wants to learn and get their feet wet doing a project, with a mentor, somebody who's been doing digital analytics for quite a while. And they work together on a project to help this nonprofit organization while teaching the mentee how to really do some of these things. So that's a really great resource to check out to really understand how you can apply some of the things you've learned and do it for a good cause. Other than that, let's go ahead and move back to the slide deck. We have a few resources that we want to go ahead and end with. So there you go. We have the demo account, which I've already mentioned and you've seen throughout this presentation. There's a little short link there so that you can easily access it if you don't have access already. We have the Google Analytics YouTube channel. So we have a ton of videos on this channel, including the one that you're seeing today will be on there after this presentation. The Analytics blog is a great resource to follow for all of our new announcements, features, different things on there. So go ahead and check that out. The Help Center is a great resource for all of your questions. Generally, you'll Google a question, and one of the first links that comes up is the Analytics Help Center. So that's our documentation for how to do these things. And finally on this list, we have quick tips with me. So those are a series of YouTube videos that we have been doing for the past several months that really are bite-sized pieces of content. They're usually 2 to 5 minutes in length, and they really dive deep on a new feature or a single product, let you know about new things that have been released, or give you more information on how to do certain things like segmentation in our products or using Data Studio. I know Charles did one with us on using Data Studio, and that was a great one. So definitely check those out. Those are a great way to increase your learning. I think that's about all we have. Yeah. I wanted to just one more time say thank you so much to Charles for joining us. You really were an asset for this presentation. I couldn't have done it without you, so thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening, for taking our courses. Don't forget, those are always a resource for you to go back to. And that's Analytics Academy with Google. And with that, we will go ahead and see you later.